You're listening to Refracted World with Terry Geo, Episode 11. As February is LGBT History Month, I thought I would open up and talk about my own history, whilst also trying to answer that age-old question, is being gay a choice? The UK government has enacted a new law which removes all sex education from schools. It is now illegal for teachers to talk to their students or even acknowledge sexual relationships, and it encourages parents to do the same. This isn't fake news. This actually happened in 1988 under the leadership of the then Tory Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. But this legislation wasn't aimed at everyone, of course, only same-sex relationships. The exact wording of the bill states, "A local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship." The bill wasn't repealed until 2000 in Scotland and 2003 in England and Wales. I left education in the late 1990s, meaning that all of my schooling was affected by this. In a time when parents didn't talk about sexuality, before the internet existed, and before we had any representation of sexuality other than man and woman. There was nowhere to learn or even talk about being gay, and yet I, and many others in my school, were. So, if being gay is a choice, how did that idea even manifest? This surely can easily be answered by a simple question. When did you choose your sexuality? Did you wake up one morning and make the choice, or did you take some time to consider all the options before choosing? Or did it just happen? Were you attracted to a girl or a boy, and that's how you knew? There are 64 countries in the world where being gay is illegal, and 11 of those countries torture and kill you if you're gay. And so, of course, there are no gay people in those countries because no one would choose to live a life that ends in a noose. Although there are gay people in those countries, millions of them, living right now, always looking over their shoulders, unable to trust anyone, and who could be captured at any moment. And we know this from the stories of those who did manage to escape, from the reports of humanitarian aid workers, and the disgusting scenes of those who are publicly executed in videos that are leaked online. If being gay were a choice, no one in those countries would choose to be gay. And I wouldn't have chosen it either. I grew up in Yorkshire in the 1980s and 90s. The only gay representation I can remember seeing on TV was by John Ingman on Are You Being Served, which is a 1970s British sitcom set in a department store. John played an over-the-top, overtly camp feminine man. Although it was never outright said in the show, he was gay, and yet it was never spoken about in my house. It's only as an adult looking back that I can see how heavily implied it was. And yet this wasn't some groundbreaking character for the BBC to include. It was more of having a comic relief, having someone the audience could laugh at rather than with. Homosexuality for men had only been legalised in the UK a few years earlier, and the general consensus of gay men was not a good one. Same-sex relations between women was never illegal. There is an infamous account of Queen Victoria declaring lesbians didn't exist and therefore a law against them wasn't needed, although that has been heavily disputed in recent years. As for gay men, the law was rescinded in July 1967, but with stipulations. Relations must be consensual, must be done in private, and must be between men 21 years and older. This stood in stark contrast to heterosexual relationships, where the age of consent was 17 years old. Both of these were reduced to 16 in the 2000s. As for me, I was always different growing up. I wrote stories, poems, and plays from a very early age. I composed music, painted, created models out of paper and plasticine, and excelled in anything creative. I didn't enjoy sports. Maths bored me, thanks to a pretty horrible teacher, and I struggled with playground banter. I was much happier reading books or performing. This was, of course, all fodder for the bullies. I was physically and mentally bullied throughout my school years, both at school and at home. All I wanted was freedom to be who I was. All of this was before I got to high school, before I started puberty, and before I knew anything about sexuality. I first realised I liked boys when I was 12. It didn't feel wrong to be attracted to the same sex, yet I knew I couldn't tell anyone. Gays were freaks, gays were wrong, but I wasn't a freak, and what I was feeling didn't feel wrong. I wasn't choosing these thoughts. Maybe everyone had them, and this was how you decided your sexuality. I didn't know, but it felt good to think about my attraction to boys. I was 13 when I went to high school. The age ranges have changed now, but this was normal back then. An entire year of newly pubescent boys and girls entering the world of young men and women. It was scary enough going to high school, but with your hormones all out of whack at the same time, it was positively terrifying. And there's no hiding who you are in front of teenagers who are older than you. I was pegged as gay from day one, and the whole school seemed to know by the end of the first week. I spent my first year denying it, and the rest of my time responding to the catcalls with, "Yeah, I am, so what?" This was met with laughing, or mock vomiting, or "I told you so's" to their friends. By then, I had a small group of friends myself. We were all outcasts in our own way, but together we protected each other. None of us big, strong, or any good in a fight, but a 10-strong group is much harder to pick on. I was also never hit at high school. I was surrounded and threatened many times, but it never happened because I soon realised I was so much smarter than the bullies and managed to talk my way out of physical violence. I hate violence of any kind, and when you've been punched and kicked and smothered as much as I had, I was no longer afraid of sticking up for myself with words. I had nothing else to lose. I was not a fighter, I was not strong, and I cry at the drop of a hat. That is a weird expression, isn't it? But let's go with it. So my weapon was my brain, and for me, at least, my words were the sharpest tool. School was an extremely turbulent time for me. I was well behaved and loved learning. I got on with most of the teachers. I was a prefect, and in my final year, the headmaster liked me so much, he made me head boy. I continued to excel in art, gaining confidence on the stage and with a paintbrush, but I really struggled with my true self. I dated girls throughout high school, but I was never really attracted to them. I dated girls because that's what was expected of me, especially by my parents. There was one girl I dated on and off throughout my time at high school. We both knew we were gay, but we were also good friends, and being together took away the suspicion from our families. Or at least so we thought. She's married now to her lovely wife and has been campaigning for LGBTQIA rights for many years. Sex education didn't exist for gay people. It was exclusively about male and female. When I was 14, I asked about same-sex relationships and was sent out of the class. I had to sit in the corridor until it was over, and afterwards told never to bring it up again. She was a bloody horrible teacher anyway, no one liked her. Even though it was illegal to talk about that, and thanks to Section 28, there are better ways of dealing with children than making them feel like an outcast. Like a freak. Maybe that's what I was. Yet I couldn't change how I felt, and I really did try. I would sit for hours, weeks, years questioning my sexuality, trying to focus on girls and like girls in that way, but I just didn't. I was, and still am, only attracted to boys. I grew up knowing I was gay, but never admitting it to myself. To my closest friends, I made out I was bisexual and just experimenting. We would play spin the bottle and I would kiss girls, but it didn't do anything for me, except make me feel a little bit more accepted. I was doing what was expected of me by everyone around me to fit in. And for a weird, overweight arts kid, fitting in was something I hadn't been able to achieve before. It makes me sad to think back to those days, hiding who I really was and having no one to talk to or turn to. I see TV shows now portraying same-sex couples in schools, and it's so wonderful to see. I wish I had had that freedom. I don't know how I got through my school years. Being constantly bullied, having so many dark thoughts, crying myself to sleep, and yet still managing to get out of bed every single day, putting a smile on my face, and heading out. I still do that now. I am still always the happy, smiley person, no matter where I am or how I'm really feeling. It's an act I perfected in high school, and one I have only now started to shake. It takes people a very long time to meet the real me, and sometimes people don't stay around that long. I am loud, I am comical, I am self-deprecating, I'm really honest, and wear my heart on my sleeve. You will know some of my most intimate thoughts in the first 5 minutes of meeting me, and all told with a huge, albeit false, smile on my face. At least that's what I was like for the majority of my life. In recent years, I am learning to be more honest with myself and those around me, although I do slip into my comfort zone more often than not. If I share emotional, embarrassing or stupid stories about myself first, they can't be used against me later. Although, being so ridiculously honest and transparent is a weakness that can be exploited, and has been exploited against me many times by acquaintances, close friends, partners, and even family. I've been advised by different therapists not to share so much, but it's been a really difficult habit to break. I used to trust people instantly, thinking we're all human beings and we all have the same moral code. But we don't, and trust should only be placed in those who earn it. That's been a tough lesson to learn. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. It is true, though. Childhood is very much your formative years, and thanks to the government and society of the time, my childhood felt more like a prison sentence, and no child should have to go through that. It's why I've worked with and campaigned for equal and human rights my entire life, and why I stand up for anyone who needs the support. Every human life is as important as the next person. Who you are and what you believe should have no bearing on who someone else is. Throughout my childhood, I always wanted to go to drama school. I wrote, directed, and narrated my first show in front of the entire school when I was 11. I was the leading role in all the plays. I was winning countless awards for my writing and my performances. And yet my parents would not allow me to go to drama school. And the thought of going to college alongside all of those people who had bullied me my entire life filled me with dread. So, when the opportunity came around to work in TV production, I jumped at the chance. Working in TV, I would surely meet film directors and actors, and maybe I could get into acting that way. Of course, working on BBC documentaries and light entertainment programmes is a very different world, and not one that crosses paths with the world of drama. But for more on that story, I've recorded a whole podcast about it. A week after leaving school, I was working for a small independent TV production company as a runner, which is the worst job in media. But finally, I could be myself with very little judgment. By the end of that week, I was outed as gay to my parents. I was at home when my parents drove back. They saw our street sign, which had been spray painted with 25 Gaysville. We lived at number 25. And outside our house on the road, someone had drawn crude images in chalk of me bent over in front of another man. I had no idea this had happened until I was accosted by my distraught and emotional parents. They told me, "You're gay, aren't you?" And in tears, I said yes, and then ran into my bedroom crying. I was embarrassed and devastated. My mum cried for the grandchildren she would never see, and my father told me all queers should be burnt to death. Life at home was a lot harder for me after that day. I no longer felt welcome there. I was made to feel uncomfortable, but as I was only earning £30 a week, this was before the minimum wage, it took me a year before I could move out, and even then it was just at my friend's parents' house. I loved working in TV, but I couldn't support myself on the terrible wage. I also had other dreams I wanted to fulfill. It wasn't until I was 20 that I could afford to rent a room in a big shared house in Leeds. I did date a few guys before that. I even lived with one of them for a while, but I needed my independence. And in Leeds, I could get that. It was much more liberal than Wakefield, although I still couldn't hold hands or kiss another guy in public. And I always projected a heterosexual when in public for my own safety. I would only ever hold hands with somebody in London, the only place in the country where being gay wasn't a slur. And that's predominantly why I moved here in the first place. It was, and still is, the only place I feel safe enough to be myself. Go outside of London and the taunts and threats come back. I was in Canterbury recently with my husband, and while walking down the street together, not even holding hands, just walking, a group of people shouted, "Effing queers," at us as we walked by. And I won't ever hold Ken's hand in Wakefield. Growing up isn't easy for anyone. Being a kid is horrible. The bullying, the hierarchy, the hormones, the learning, the exams, the social pressures, and all of this while discovering who you are. That's more than enough to be dealing with. No one should be given the added worry that they are not normal, being outcast for the way they were born, and being isolated because they are not the same as everyone else. No matter the reason, be it sexual orientation or race or gender or anything that is deemed different from the majority, every single life is unique, and every life deserves the same chance and the same respect as everyone else. Things are a lot better for homosexuals now. Section 28 was abolished over 20 years ago, meaning the new generations never experienced it. Same-sex marriage was legalised 10 years ago, and sex education is now offered to everyone. But we are seeing the same thing happen once again under a Tory government, except this time it's aimed at trans kids. The sooner we get these monsters out of office, the better. I know what I went through, and I am sick to my stomach knowing what transsexual kids will be going through now. I really hope the anti-trans laws they passed this year are repealed later this year. And for all of those people who are saying sexuality and gender are not the same thing, and you are not born trans, I've even heard members of the gay community say this. Shame on you. If you really think any person would willingly put themselves through the torture and torment that comes from simply showing the world who you are and what you are, especially a child, you need to listen to this podcast again. No one wants to be bullied. No one wants to feel isolated and to feel like a freak, have disappointed parents, be shunned by friends, and have no one to turn to. By not talking about something, it doesn't magically disappear. Being trans didn't start a few years ago, just like being gay didn't start in the 1960s. There are recorded documents of trans people in ancient civilizations. It's just now you're seeing and hearing more people come forward and living their true lives because of the internet and social media, and because people started to feel safer in the world. And what happened when they did come out? All 0.5 to 1% of them? Laws were swiftly filed, and public opinion once again swayed to put them back into the shadows, where they can't live their lives, and you don't have to deal with the fact that there are other people sharing this planet that are different to you. Google is a free resource. Spend 5 minutes of your life reading about or watching a video about trans people, why they exist, and why repressing them will do nothing but mentally scar millions of people, especially children. We should be embracing them, not turning our backs on them. And breathe. To me, it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, trans, black, white, or my beautiful ginger cat. Everyone is welcome here. And I expect the same back. Thank you for listening, and I hope you join me again soon. Until the next time. Take care.